Welcome back to the next installment of our Au revoir Fontenoy Ménage à Trois, which has now gone on a little longer than 3 episodes. We are coming to the close of our final thoughts about Fontaine going into Notlon, and there's a lot that we haven't said, mostly about the setting and the narrative. First up, a couple fun things to get out of the way. 4.x was the era of Genshin where we really started to see more animated shorts, namely a robust short showing Arlecchino's backstory, as well as a little music video with the twins. To our knowledge, neither of these are part of the ufotable collaboration. They appear to be made in-house, but it's neat to see some of that budget going into more cool forms of media.
Yeah, Genshin has always been pretty dedicated to kind of expanding their media, at least in terms of, at the very least, bringing in kind of outside culture in. But in this case, they're kind of reinvesting it a little bit more directly into themselves with the production of these shorts, which I'm frankly surprised we didn't see even a little bit sooner, given, I guess, how long Genshin has been around at this point.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of like sponsored fan animations, which are absolutely fantastic and a great way to leverage this really passionate fan base, but never stuff that was really fully animated in-house. I think the closest thing we got was the Ayaka short of her sparring with her brother, but that was still mostly an animatic, kind of using the like motion puppet design 2D thing that they do for the character teasers. This was full-on anime, baby.
And it was good too. It was really effective as a marketing tool.
You can tell when they want you to roll that character, and Arlecchino certainly got the black and red carpet.
I wish, though, that they found a way to better incorporate it into the game itself, because I
Yes.
feel like that gave so much context to Arlecchino as a character that it really, I don't know, it changed the way that I think a lot of people were perceiving her up to that point. And I think that having those events that are presented in that anime video only done like outside of the game means people have to know about it, go to find it, and look at it if they want that context, whereas in the game it's just like a brief mention by her during her story quest.
It's definitely adding to a problem that we've touched on beforehand, where there's just a wealth of external media that just isn't in the game that contributes a lot to the characters and setting. But again, because it's not in the game, if you're only engaging with Genshin through gameplay, then you're just never going to get it.
And if you're like, number one, a newcomer to the game who maybe just started playing now and won't reach Arlecchino's SQ for a while, and B, don't follow Genshin on its social media outlets, like you're not even gonna know to look for this. It really isn't a future-proof way to expand on the game through other media, and hopefully we'll see it better integrated in the future. As for the work itself, like it's awesome. I also want to give a mention to some of Genshin's rivals in the gacha game scene because they've really been forced to up their game as far as putting out like compelling YouTube video content. There's an animated music video for a character from, I think it's Reverse 1999. That's like a musical procession. It's just beautiful, fully sung and fully animated. And it's cool that if Genshin's legacy is going to be anything, it's that other people have to make cool stuff to compete with it, and we all win. Speaking of other media, there was one surprising one that came in the form of a Discovery Channel collab. This was kind of a weird, scattered attempt at raising an environmental message. By the way, if you ever ask yourself why companies do this, it's for tax write-off reasons. But that doesn't mean that some of the stuff they can do in the pursuit of a tax break can't also be really cool. One example of this is the museum mode in the recent Assassin's Creed games, where you can like just go around the setting and see stuff explained to you of like, this is what it was in the concept of ancient Egypt, blah, 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 blah. Again, educational tax write-off, very cool feature. This, however, kind of a nothing burger. It's an 8-minute short. It has a bunch of like celebrities doing voiceovers from the POV of different biomes set over a montage of generic B-roll. It's clunky, it's not really informative, it tells more than it shows. It's kind of the encapsulation of like, imagine a really bad collected miscellany like that, but like for the ocean. And listen, I am always a slut for a nature doc. David Attenborough is my actual biological dad, and I wanted this to be awesome, but it just kind of wasn't. It felt really disjointed because it was marketed with Genshin characters. It was supposed to have this narrative of like Kaveh going through the different natural environments, and each one had a character representing it, like Candace for the desert and Beto for the ocean. But there's literally no Genshin in the nature doc itself, making it kind of a strange what do you call it?
It sounds like it wasn't as effective as a tie-in.
Yes, and we can see that from the numbers that they put out, wrapping up the event, saying 5,000 travelers participated, raising $32,500 for rainforest conservation. This is a laughably small amount for a game like Genshin to raise with a kind of like fundraising initiative. It just really wasn't pushed very well, and unfortunately the numbers reflected that. Usually a big game with such a huge social media presence can be expected to raise like, a couple 100K perhaps for a philanthropy initiative. Too bad this ended up being kind of forgettable when it could have been really great. But that's okay because we do have Kit Harington telling us that he's the ocean, and that's all I needed in my life.
And
So next time you try to like throw a can in the ocean or something, you're gonna hear Jon Snow saying, "I didn't want it.
Don't want it.
I didn't want it." Jon Snowshin.
Jon Snowshin.
Stupid.
No, it's perfect.
And our final little mini bite of Genshin stuff before we get into our main discussion. You thought she was in the clear. You thought nothing could happen to her. I want to tell you that Kujo Sara has taken her L's to the real world in this very special edition of our favorite segment, There Is No W in Tengu.
Please excuse me while I
So we churls have an annual tradition of going to one of the larger local anime conventions in our lovely state of California. And this was kind of notable because that day was the big Genshin cosplay day. There were tons of Genshin and Honkai and, Hoyoverse cosplayers everywhere.
We saw the usual gigantic gaggle of Genshin cosplayers, but only one Kujo Sara, who we just happened to see as we walked past the street food stalls, and as we did, turned to her friend as she was trying to pay for her food with Square or whatever and said, "Shit, I locked myself out of my phone."
At which point we all just turned to each other with our masks slightly ajar and shock written all over our faces going, "A real life L."
A real life L. So shout out to that Kujo Sara cosplayer for making our day. Hopefully you had an alternate method of payment and got to eat your danger dog or street corn or whatever you were ordering, but it was incredibly funny. Get him next time, Kujo Sara.
We're all rooting for you.
Finally, at long last, our thoughts on the setting of Fontaine. We've given you the AQ, we've given you the gameplay mechanics, but now we are here to talk about the aesthetics and themes proper of Genshin's hottest, wettest region. Unexpectedly, like Sumeru, Fontaine ended up kind of being a melange of Western European cultures. They're very clearly French, Italian, British, Spanish, and a little German in there. Basically all of the countries that sponsor Eurovision. But as the name suggests, the main cultural culprit behind the region of Fontaine is, of course, it's kind of fun if you trace the line that Amir mentioned from east to west that includes Liyue. It kind of mimics like the Silk Road trajectory of like easternmost being Inazuma, Japan, going west towards China, Liyue, through the Silk Road route of South Asia and Northern Africa. And then you kind of like loop up the Mediterranean. And that's where all of the Fonch countries would be.
Yeah, their map seems to want to just sort of make a U version of the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm. It is kind of weird that they double dip with Germany.
Yeah, and that double dipping with Germany has also unfortunately led to a situation of a Fonchland with no wine.
Or cheese.
Sin number one, the complete lack of cheese and wine in the France region. Shout out to one of the version previews where Lenny and Lynette taught us to make brie en croûte, which is a cheese-based dish that isn't even part of the game's menu.
Sin number 2, no garlic for the garlic baguettes.
Yeah, what the heck. But cheese aside, like France is to Western Europe what China is to East Asia. It's the cultural epicenter of the entire continent, and it's also really up its own ass about that. So, with its rich legacy in mind, we went into Fontaine with the Frenchiest of expectations. We have some consummate oui abus in this group, and are generally casual fans of like French art, culture, literature, etc. And unfortunately, that's kind of where Fontaine left a lot of stuff lacking.
Yeah. So the promise of what we thought Fontaine was going to be before visiting the region definitely emphasized kind of the more steampunk elements of it. Like a lot of the essentially the NPCs that you would run into like Xavier before you were actually in the region were kind of giving the impression that it would be about kind of like film and the emergence of new technology in France, which is actually the case in the region, but that's just kind of not reflected in the city of Fontaine proper. A lot of the city draws more inspiration from a little bit more conventional Beaux-Arts design in France, like the Champs-Élysées, like the palatial gardens at Versailles, like the parts of the Louvre that aren't a giant glass pyramid.
Yeah, where was the
Um,
glass? We expected more glass and brass and got a lot of concrete instead.
And
Yeah,
ass.
yeah. Like the design philosophy of Fontaine in general just seemed to be like with very little like visible steampunk that's kind of integrated into the actual design of at least the part of the city where the players spend most of their time.
When you kind of immerse yourselves in these themes, there is a domino effect of stuff you kind of expect or hope to see. When you see French inventors and filmmakers, you think of emerging technology. When you think of that plus a nation of water, you think of steampunk as an aesthetic. Steampunk implies Jules Verne style stuff. It implies things being exhibited at a World's Fair, and then that implies its own form of aesthetics and like World's Fair architecture, which is very, very distinct, very ornate, and it implies the time period, which is going to be like late 1800s to even closer to the 20s, where you're going to get your Art Nouveau, your Art Deco, Expressionism, like just kind of the Belle Epoque France plus fantasy. Not so much of that. Like almost no Art Nouveau, which is too bad because all of the nations so far had very like rustic or geometric aesthetics, and I would have loved to have this be like the one where you see a little more filigree, a little more figure. I think they knocked it out of the park with the Archon statue. Like that statue of Fauchelevent is a fantastic example of like what a bronze Art Nouveau sculpture of the era would look like. However, this didn't really seem to be picked up that much in the buildings.
Yeah. It's just strange too, because it's like there are a lot of instances where you can tell that they looked at these design cues. Like you do have dirigibles, you do have the astral clock tower looking thing. They're just not really dense enough or emphasized.
They were just kind of thrown in there with little relevance to the way we learn about this place in the story.
Which is a shame too, because given that the Archon Quest really reinforces how much of a spectacle Fontaine is supposed to be, one would think that there would be more kind of World's Fair Mickey Mousing going on, when instead it's just kind of like conventional French Beaux-Arts corridors with a couple of robots sprinkled along the sides.
Now, I do appreciate the thematic significance of Fontaine City being built inside a dam. That was one of the more successful ways they showed like what the culture's relation to its element is. Way back when we talked about Inazuma's setting, we talked about how A's pursuit of eternity is intrinsically opposed to her essence as lightning, which is something that is the opposite of eternity. It's very brief, it's transient. And the tension between those two essences kind of literally ripping the fabric of the country apart. Whereas Fontaine is a region that embodies the essence of water in both ways that are beneficial, but also apocalyptic in the context of the Fontenoy people. So it is really striking to have the city built into a dam, bracing itself against its signature element and indeed protecting it from the wrath of the very waters from which it gets its name. Unfortunately, this meant you have a city where the sightlines are looking down, and that's just not really a fun city to be in.
Yeah, especially when the city just isn't quite densely populated enough or spectacular enough to really be looking down on anything. Like, where are my Ferris wheels? Where are my
Yeah.
my clowns in the street? Like,
Where's the big
Well,
elephant?
there's
yeah.
also the gajillion foot high walls that make it so that it really is like kind of separated from its surrounding landscape too.
Exactly. Like a dam is cool thematically, but it also means no matter where you're standing in the city, 50% of your viewpoint is going to be taken up by a wall.
I think there's a reason they put the Opera Epiclese like outside of the city for a lot of the more cinematic moments.
Yeah.
I think it would
Definitely.
have been maybe not as functional from the practical perspective they were going for when putting it in a dam, but it would have been more interesting to have the city on top of the dam. It would have been interesting to see the Fleuve Cendre citizenry maybe be the ones who are actually operating like the functions of the dam, keeping track of it, maintaining it, and then that's where we see like the lower class members of that city and society having to then interact with the community at large, where it's like we're literally built on the backs of the hard work of these poor that are being exploited by everyone else. And then that's where we start to see that big class difference. Maybe we see a Numa like differentials, maybe we see a little bit more we see inside the dam and Numa on top, like because we got a lot of contradictions or like binaries within Fontaine society and across Fontaine as a region. So it was interesting that we didn't see that better reflected in the city itself.
Yeah, the binary aspect of it was almost never explored. The upper city and the lower city, the Wysia and the Numa, and then even the Archon's eyes being light and dark. Like none of that it was kind of fake symbolism. And then I should get that clip from Lower Decks where he's like Kitty Hawk that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. Yes.
Kitty Hawk? Kitty Hawk? That reveal doesn't make any sense!
Well, and it really doesn't make sense that we didn't see a lot more architectural styles, especially ones related to France and technological development explored within Fontaine, the city of water itself, because as we know, the power of water is to take any shape.
Yeah, that's especially strange because as later patches showed, between Petrichor and Remuria, there was kind of an interest in showing how these different styles could interact. Especially with Petrichor being a little bit more directly Mediterranean and Corsican, with pretty stark contrast to sort of the inner city of Fontaine. But again, like the idea of there being a divide between these two areas isn't really ever emphasized to any capacity.
I know we swim around the ruins of Old Fontaine, like within the Font-de-Merci, but those ruins don't look significantly different from surface level Fontaine. If anything, they're kind of hybridized with the generic underground civilization slash Conrian ruins that we see in every other nation, which is already kind of boring and gray and looks a lot like Fontaine. Like, maybe they want to show Fontaine had gone past this like Rococo Gilded Age of French culture into something a bit more modern. But then how cool would it be if the ruins we explored then reflected those old aesthetics and they had more of just like, the scroll work and the fleur-de-lis stuff and just like, gaudy furniture. Like anything to just kind of put one more aesthetic in this region would have been nice.
Yeah, yeah. I can't help but feel that Sumeru might have spoiled us a little bit in that regard, given the stark contrast between academia and, I guess, the desert, more or less.
Oh my god, Sumeru, the way they integrated their like ancient underground culture by hybridizing like Conria aesthetics with ancient Egyptian, peak. just peak. Fantastic.
Beautiful.
Although definitely one of the standout positive notes of Fontaine as a setting is its resident non-human sentient race, the Melusines. I love these little freaks. I think they are so funny. The interpretation of a Melusine being like a French mermaid kind of situation as these sort of sea slug nudibranch type little alien girls is very funny. And the fact that these slug girls live in little snail shell houses also means they're just one big escargot joke. And we love that.
Yeah, in general, the Melusines were a really great addition just because these little slug things like don't really have a good analog in terms of being a presence in other forms of similar fiction. Like Melusines are something that is completely original to Genshin, and to that end, I think that they were really successful because they're incredibly memorable. Even their origin is something that's unique in a cool way. Like they are offshoots of a dead dragon and
Yeah.
are still more comfortable with like anything related to the abyss than humans are. Like that's great.
The Melusines, more than anything, were used to convey French themes in really surprising ways. For instance, Ma Mère, it's implied that like Melusines see in a different spectrum than humans, and then even she paints things in a way that's weird to other Melusines, and that's kind of like what the dawn of Impressionism and then Fauvism was like. Is like people appearing to see the world through like a different visual perception, and everyone like freaking out about it. And she was kind of like the homage to that, and I thought that was really cute. Fontaine definitely has a Disneyland Paris vibe. The Melusines fill the role of like a Mickey Mouse. The way they talk, the way they gesticulate with their dumb mitten hands, the narrated monorail tour that you get into the city, like they serve really well for that. In the teaser trailer for Fontaine, they had a Melusine as a cop. They can see, I think, ultraviolet, which means they can see like crime scene evidence, and that fits into like Fontaine's criminal pursuits of justice and stuff. They also tie it into kind of the mythological aspects of like French mythology, such as the Melusines, various water creatures, stuff like that. They were even used as an ethnic minority to shockingly tell a Genshin modified version of the Dreyfus Affair, which is probably the deepest French cut they have done in this entire game. That would be Nivelette's Quest, which pays homage to a really dark and shameful point in France's legal history that is honestly kind of too much of a bummer to really go into here, but like in that respect, I was impressed with the homework they did and how much they managed to pack into these little slug freaks.
Definitely a lot of the early Archon quests and character quests were like shockingly on theme with regards to justice, as well as sort of how the different like outsiders who became insiders operated within Fontaine.
Yeah. 4.0 was awesome. Like, no notes, 4.0 was such a strong intro to this setting. Another great unexpected thing about the setting of Fontaine was the crimes! Welcome to the big crime time, everybody. It's Mafia Mayhem out here in Fontaine, and that was awesome.
We got a lot of crimes. We got a guy buried up to his neck in sand with chicken laid around his head, so he'd be eaten by the carnivorous crabs. We had what was that guy's nickname? The Fisherman?
Yeah.
Who would basically like send people off a pier in cement shoes. We had obviously the Spina di Rosula, who were never explicitly acknowledged as a crime syndicate, but my God, were there a lot of indicators in there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah, just look at him.
They just managed to keep their, nose clean publicly, but also, yeah, just fucking look at them. We got that one small-time petty criminal who we went spelunking and treasure hunting with, who the churls affectionately refer to as Measurehead because he is French and racist.
Even though he's Virgil.
He is named Virgil, which is crazy. At the end of his quest line, you actually get to tattle to a higher level hitman. I believe his name is the White Glove, and his muscle/boyfriend, and you get to whack him. Measurehead dies. You are responsible for the death of a man, and it's awesome.
We got to hit a man, we got to whack a man, we got to off a man, we got to whack off a man.
He had it coming.
He had it coming.
No. Good 1-2 punch.
Are we allowed to say that on
Didn't
YouTube?
even realize it.
per capita, it really felt like this region was kind of the region of like crimes and scams and weird marketing shit. Like, I think that other regions had quests that, got around in some ethical gray areas, especially in Sumeru, given all the hijinks at academia. But this was definitely the one where it felt like the criminal aspect of it was more emphasized.
This is kind of like the big city plots that you would expect from Liyue, it supposedly being like the big metropolis of Teyvat, but like the big shitty city crimes happening in Fontaine were something that like I think we all kind of wanted from Genshin for a while, and it just made it super fun. So whenever that element was in play, it was absolutely a joy. I love also just like the visual design on the mafiosi is very cute because they'll have like, pinstripe jackets and hats and sunglasses, but then like because this is nominally Belle Époque France, they also have like black trousers and those like knee-high leggings and stuff. So they're kind of like, like French dudes from the shin down, and then like, Goodfellas from the waist up.
And the crime was so prevalent in Fontaine that there were instances where things were happening that I thought were going to turn out to be like scams or crimes and weren't. Like when I first met Salsa in that little World Quest like sideline there, I thought she was scamming us for something. I didn't know what, but I thought we were like getting hoodwinked into doing some crimes for her.
That's awesome. We also had serial killers, like a lot of serial killers. That was insane.
We had
you
like
could have
2.
5 or 6 serial killers or just one.
2, but they were very efficient at putting people in that proverbial blender and turning them into sweet, sweet synth.
We also had an event exclusive serial killer who killed other criminals.
Yeah, we had Dexter.
We had Dexter / the Punisher.
That event was delightful. Probably followed up more on the Frenchiness that we wanted to see in this region than the AQ did. We have a full stream VOD of it that we did in collaboration with Tales of Teyvat on our YouTube, and it was a lot of fun. Do you think Neuvillette, with his advanced sense of taste of water, could drink synth and tell you who is in it?
God.
I hope so. That would help with their investigation a lot.
It would at least help, like, sort through remains and get them back to their loved ones.
Yeah, but does that qualify as like some kind of like god blasphemy? I think it probably does.
He has to have those spit buckets, like when you do wine tasting, he just like, spits out all of Jeff into like one cup and then like all the rest of Ashley in another.
I mean, it certainly wouldn't be the first time he had part of a man in his mouth.
Jesus.
Moving on.
Okay. I don't think there's anything anyone can say after that.
All right. So what was this region? It was a lot of the Little Mermaid. A lot of the serial killing and a lot of the quest involving Furina and the justice that apparently needed to be administered to everyone in Fontaine was just sort of a large-scale version of the Little Mermaid. A lot of like the other cultural stuff that we were kind of expecting fell away in service to Little Mermaid.
Including the poetry event with that random Oceanid, and the summer event prior with that random Oceanid. It's mermaids all the way down. Little ones, in fact.
Yeah.
So what defines a Little Mermaid story? Number 1, longing for humanity when you're not. Number 2, living amongst humanity with a great secret that you literally cannot, like, speak of.
You don't have a soul. And that's
Yeah.
you are not a real person. Like, you need to be defined as like other than human while still imitating a human.
I think what the Little Mermaid really boils down to like just a story about passing.
Yeah, and then like at the end of it, you get to join humanity, but at a very great cost, or you don't even make it that far.
Or you just
And that's
turn
like what
into
the
synth.
entire region, like a huge undercurrent, of the region was about.
Blub, blub,
that.
blub, 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 blub.
The region was by and by 20% French culture, 5% English culture, 35% justice shenanigans, if you want to call them that, 35% The Little Mermaid, but on a nationwide scale, and only 5% steampunk if we're counting the Numa and Wisa tech as steampunk. And that is what made up Fontaine.
They should have verned it up, man.
Yeah, they didn't burn it up enough.
Come on, vern it up.
Fontaine was unfocused for that exact reason.
Yeah, it was called like the Land of Justice, but was nominally the land of prophecy for the entirety of the AQ, which in its own right could have been really interesting. Like we've seen both in game and just in kind of real world mythology, a lot of connections to like water and fortune telling. We have Mona, who's a fortune teller and uses water as like a glass for the stars. I think they could have leaned into that a lot more heavily if they wanted to in terms of the theming of the country. It just seemed like they didn't have a clear idea of what they wanted the country to represent or be about, but they knew the like end result of the story they needed to get to.
Mona, who appeared in the AQ in a baffling capacity, literally, it seemed just to quash any headcanon of her being from Fontaine, since apparently she's not from Mondstadt, and that was a prevailing like fan theory at the time. Literally only shows up in one scene to be like, oh yeah, prophecies are real, and I'm not French, although I can totally see why you would think that. And then she dips for the rest of the AQ. Second weirdest use of a Hydro playable character in the Fontaine AQ. Give us back our boy.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a way, it's a little bit ironic that prophecy was sort of the almost primarily emphasized but also incongruous element for their theming, because it seems like much like a prophecy, they knew what they wanted their end state to be, but in terms of meshing the idea with justice, they didn't really have a clear path of doing so, and so they just kind of mashed them together and hoped it would turn out all right.
If you want to really stretch it, it's more like divine justice and inherent mortal sin. Which, okay, if you want it to be that, cool, but like set that up in your preview for the region, set that up in the AQ proper, and most of all, don't give the country of Fontaine an absolute warped justice system and have fixing it not be not only not the point of the AQ, but not really addressed as a priority at all in the game.
Yeah, this was by and by the worst justice system I think I might have ever seen, because it's basically all about Neuvillette, the king, god, emperor, dragon, running the justice system of the country with the agreement of a magic scale, and then his little dragon girl police force daughters patrolling the streets like Disneyland mascots. It's contingent on Neuvillette being a good person. And that's sort of the only thing holding this together, which I know we've seen with Mondstadt and Jean, but it's really egregious here, especially with like 20 years of Vacher murders on their backlog.
Yeah, a country that is introduced as our courtrooms are treated as popular entertainment, like, that's not great.
Yeah, you would think there'd be some kind of message in there at some point about how the voyeuristic nature of public prosecution, court cases, murders, what have you. You'd think that there would be some message about how that's actually like bad and how like public perception can be altered, or maybe basing an entire justice system on literal hype levels isn't really justice. Because that's a really great way to give the player a cool problem that they need to, overturn and have a revolution against and,
Mhm.
Establish like what real justice is. But for some reason, they decided we want Neuvillette to be the guy in charge from the very beginning. And that also meant that he was going to be completely unimpeachable because
Yeah.
he's a playable character, therefore he needs to be sellable, and therefore he needs to be likable and a good guy. So that just went in the garbage.
People still go to Meropide nominally forever because they quote unquote like it.
Yeah. Is Meropide a good or bad place to be? I don't know. The game flip-flops on it.
Kind of seems to be a shithole.
But again, the administrators are also playable characters, so they also need to be likable, meaning they need to have a justification for why this is okay, why eternal imprisonment is acceptable. And the answer they decided to kind of go with was, oh, because they like it down there.
Yeah.
It's much better for them than it would be above ground, without really like exploring why that is. Like that's another thing, is like justice inherently asks you to consider inequality in your society and how people are treated differently and what's the best way we can make sure that everyone is treated the same or fairly. But then you have all of these systems within Fontaine that show a stark juxtaposition between two groups, and they don't really explore that. Again, you have the Floof Sandra, you have the people in Meropide. It's like, why are things better for people here in Meropide than they are above ground? We never explore that.
Because everyone is telling us that it's bad. Why is Flip Sandra a shithole with literal crocodiles in it? And that's just like not commented on. To tell a story about justice, you do have to make an assertion of like what justice is. And it can be really basic, but you have to like say something. And what you don't say also counts against you. In a story about justice that doesn't mention this disparity, you're saying that like the disparity is not something that you, the player, need to care about. Like, whatever, just live with it. Kind of crazy coming off of Sumeru, where like class and racial disparity was actually a theme in the AQ. And this is a game that does ponder its themes, and in all the post-launch regions has done that really successfully. In Sumeru and Inazuma, the conflict is kind of like a negative application of its core theme. The conflict of Inazuma is like bad eternity. It's a nation in stasis. It's a god who won't change. And that's something that we fix. In Sumeru, it's bad wisdom. It's wisdom that is gate-kept. It's wisdom that is used for selfish purposes. And that is something that we fix. Fontaine clearly has bad justice in the form of this messed up justice system, and that goes completely unaddressed in favor of the flood story. It would be like if at the end of Sumeru, Sumeru ends with Nahida destroying the Akasha system, something that is proven to be inherently biased, corrupt, and not good for the people. And if Sumeru was written like the Fontaine AQ, we would have defeated Scaramouche and left the current bad Akasha system intact. And that just like kind of doesn't sit well to me as someone playing a character who makes other people's problems their own and sets regions on a better path than they were. Fontaine is basically in the same exact state in which we found it on a functioning day-to-day level. It's just that the flood's not going to happen.
And nothing else about like everyone's quality of living or day to day or how crimes are handled will ever be talked about again.
I think they were trying to get into that theme a little bit more when they introduced the concept of like this prophecy is happening because, you know, Celestia on a certain level is unhappy with the Fontenoy people because they agreed to be changed into these humans from the Oceanids, but that was a crime that never went really addressed. So like this is the punishment that's coming generations later when the people don't even know what the crime that was committed was. The problem is the ending of the AQ completely undercut that because, oh, it's not Celestia causing this. It's a big whale MacGuffin that just showed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the original sin of being a nation full of little mermaids, and that's justice, making it so that they don't die.
You know who else is an embodiment of original sin? The literal children who are born and live in Meropide. Yep. What about them? What do you got to say about them?
Like, the worst part is that we're aware that the game developers are aware of this, because even in the backstory of Fontaine that's buried in the AQ, they talk about essentially like even Fontenoy seeing other Fontenoy as being like savages, as well as the historical conflicts between like the individuals in the Fleuve Centre versus the rest of Fontaine. Like, this is something that's already in the game. It's just not portrayed.
And I know we've talked about this in previous episodes and with our little crossover with Tales of Teyvat. I think the reason we keep coming back to it is not because we necessarily hated Fontaine or we only have bad things to say about it. It's just such a large theme that has so many interesting implications for a setting when you get down to it, because the theme of justice can touch every part of the character's life. And we just didn't see it explored enough to really get a good or satisfying answer to what is justice in this society for any of us. And so I would hope that moving forward, if we're exploring other themes in Teyvat, that it would be given that, you know, due credit that is needed, because the next region we're going to, Natlan, is the land of war. That has big implications too.
Mm-hmm. And we're probably not gonna get them. Also, just to make a point that I wanted to bring up since we did the Fontaine AQ discussion, just to be clear, my personal hatred of Focalors has nothing to do with my dislike of the Fontaine Archon quest. Those are two totally separate things. I actually think Focalors is a great character in service of the story. In what she did to Farina, she shows this level of detached cruelty, but that's a direct result of her not being human, which is the whole point of the Little Mermaid parallel. She can't feel things like love and pain, which her human version, Farina, has the privilege and the agony of experiencing. And all of that makes perfect sense in the story. I have zero complaints about Focalors in terms of writing quality or her role in the Archon quest. I just personally think she's less redeemable than Raiden A. She's not invited to my birthday party, and I'm glad she's dead. Fight me.
Also, special shout out to my girl Chiori, whose story quest involves using mafia connections to fight against the accusation that she has mafia connections. Love that as a story beat. You
It-
go, girl.
You live your best self.
Keep it up, baby.
Go, baby.
Keep it up, baby.
Another reason for just kind of our critical response to the Archon quest is the ending was a lore dump, and I'm really starting to get sick of lore in this game. Let me tell you that, like, I love lore. I think it's really fun to dig into, the distant past and kind of like put stuff together and think about things. But let me tell you, lore is piss easy to write and it's dirt cheap because lore doesn't have a promise of payoff. It's really easy for a writer to say, oh, person A is actually the great grandson of person B who created the artifact C that brought down the evil kingdom of D, when none of those things appear in the game's story. It's really easy to make lore feel expansive because you just have to say, oh, by the way, person X mentioned in this book and person Y mentioned in that artifact are the same person. So Genshin will trick you by writing out and giving you a bunch of intricate details on something that you haven't encountered yet, but it has zero promise of paying it off in the story. And at this point, we're ostensibly like past the halfway point of the game. And when Skirt comes on screen and just starts barfing out names, shit I don't care about, it's like, no, you can't keep expanding. You have to move forward now. You have to start paying stuff off. You're spinning your wheels. Stop ending things on a lore dump. You have to start tying stuff off. They're writing Genshin like a source book when it's way past time to start running the campaign. This story is hundreds of hours long, and we need to start moving. And I think people are kind of feeling that too, because I was actually very impressed with the fandom having a bit of a backlash towards the Archon interlude, which we also thought was terrible. Probably more offensive than the Archon quest because Dainsleif only comes once a year, ostensibly to move the plot forward, and he wasted all of our time, but tried to cover it up with an emotional beat, which is something Genshin is very good at writing, but uses as a crutch to not tell as good of a story. So, like, yes, Kari Bear had a very sentimental, touching death scene, but he could have had that like last year. We didn't need Kari Bear 2. We didn't need the sibling to show up for the sibling and the traveler to have a scene, talk about nothing, and then have it retcon from memory. Like, it just felt like it was insulting. It was an insulting waste of our time. And I'm glad people are starting not to take it anymore. Hoyo thinks we're stupid. They literally do. That's why they write at like this baby level and have jangly, shiny keys in the forms of cutscenes and emotional payoff. But people are starting to catch on, and
It's not even really emotional payoff because, like you said, they're not going to remember this.
yeah, I should say like emotional, like fake emotional catharsis, because you'll see someone die in a sad and beautiful way.
Which is a shame too, because I'm not even against the Kari Bear story. I actually like it quite a bit. But I think waiting for an entire year for any kind of payoff on it, and then essentially concluding it with something that doesn't even happen really, because it's just retconned from the in-universe's characters' memories, it seems a little bit cheap.
It didn't even need to be erased from their memories because they didn't say anything of any real value to each other. Like, sure, there was emotional catharsis for the characters, but as the viewer, what are we getting from this? The answer is like nothing, nothing.
Like, actually nothing. Finally, to end our tirade of Faunch negativity, I want to introduce my tinfoil hat theory and the concept of cannibalism. Something that probably happens in Fontaine on a literal level, but I'm mostly looking at it from a development point of view. And I think Fontaine suffered substantially from cannibalism in terms of its development in two fronts. Number one, Fontaine was cannibalized in terms of developer resources because they rolled out Fontaine, they rolled out underwater gameplay, which is not a small feat, and they devoted an entire patch to rolling out Chenyu Vale, which has a lot of stuff in it. This all takes people off the helm of making Fontaine a more substantial and better region. Probably not writing wise. The writing would not have been affected, but there would have been maybe a little more visual interest, maybe a few more things to do, and it could have just been shored up to be a better experience. However, the deeper and more speculative part of this thesis goes to thematic cannibalism. And here I'm going to make an assertion, unfounded, that Fontaine was thematically cannibalized by Penacony. Now, Break, why don't you tell us a little bit what Penacony is?
All right, to put it in brief, Penacony is the newest region in Honkai Star Rail. The bulk of its story content was following, timeline-wise, right on the heels of Fontaine's narrative release. They were probably in development around the same time, but there are a lot of parallels to be drawn between them, including the notion that Penacony was a former penal colony, hence the name Penacony. But it also dealt with various similar themes of justice, dreams, being in a society that is being undermined internally by bad systems.
Even on an aesthetic level, a lot of the things that they were kind of hinting at for Fontaine, the Art Deco style, the theme park-esque design, the artifice, the luxury, weird tinkering inventions, steampunk stuff.
Turn of the century jazz, French adjacent kind of artistic representations.
It had the World's Fair stuff in it, like for sure. Dirigibles and crap. Right down to the fact that one of our ill-fated Fontaine bingo card squares was the traveler crashes a soiree on a fancy yacht, which did not happen in Fontaine, but pointedly did happen in the epilogue of Penacony. We live in the ganked Fontaine timeline.
We even see like a Fleuve Cendre equivalent in Dreamflux Reef, which is also hinted at being physically under the rest of Penacony within the dreamscape that exists there. So we're also seeing themes of like stark inequality between groups in this system, where it's just kind of chosen, oh yeah, there's an in crowd and an out crowd here.
There's crime families, there's like some kind of nebulous weird resource that doubles as an energy source for the region. There's funky little Mickey Mouse people, and like they went all in on that. They had like Cuphead level animations with like Clocky and Hanu that they did not extend to Genshin. These games are probably made in different pipelines. However, they are both put out by the same company, and Hoyo does not want to compete with itself. Therefore, it would not want two concurrent game settings looking too similar to each other. And I think the way they split it, theming wise, was that Penacony got the bigger half. And maybe a lot of flavor that was too redundant might have been taken out of Fontaine and kind of replaced with nothing to create a bit of a bland, sterile experience.
Or at the very least, the edges were sanded off, where it looks, I mean, even from the manner of how Fontaine characters dress, like in generally speaking, darker clothing, I would have expected something ahead of time that looked a little bit more visually like Penacony when the region was launching. And then we kind of got this like really sort of bright setting with a lot of the core concepts kind of squashed down or sort of dumbed down.
Yeah, and you had a really good point about this in the earliest days of the Fontaine preview. Is you brought up that in the Eastern tradition of the four elements, water's color is black. And you see a lot more dark and black clothes on the Fontaine playables.
Also, we can all agree, Misha's just wearing Furina's clothes, right?
Oh, yeah.
They look real similar.
Yeah. Hell, Xingqiu is wearing Furina's clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So all this to say that we don't know the exact nature of the development. We know that like the teams are physically located in different buildings, but yeah, from a top-down perspective, from a company-wide perspective, from a let's not compete with each other perspective, it seems as if their ideas for Fontaine were big enough where it literally overflowed into a different game, at least from an outsider looking in.
Yeah, we were robbed. Remember, kids, pasting gears on buildings does not make something steampunk. Putting gears on people's clothing in Fontaine does not make a setting steampunk. We were robbed, we were swindled, and jump in the sea and cry about it, I guess.
I did really like that music, though. It wasn't
yeah.
jazz, but it was pretty good.
Music was so good.
I'm just a little salty that none of it was easy to make a mashup with.
Not enough
Salty or
accordion.
salt water?
Because it's funny because the previous summer event had French jazz in it, the one with the Oceanid. And that's kind of like the flavor that I was like, oh, they're doing this here and not in Fontaine. What's Fontaine? Well, it being Mondstadt too, it's just kind of more of the Western canon of classical music with some fun tin whistles in there for a sea shanty good time. I guess my beef with the Fontaine soundtrack is like, once again, just wasn't French enough. Like they really just did kind of generic Western Europe classical instead of like delving into French music, like French classical, folk, opera, Musette, Edith Piaf style stuff, and then like getting into French jazz. I think especially the overworld and battle themes, they just really kind of sounded generically symphonic and not so much French. I will say though, because I am a gamer, I noticed that one Fontaine underwater track has the same synth organ as Dire Dire Docks from Mario 64, which is my favorite Mario song. And I'm pretty sure that's an intentional shout out to what is the OG grandpappy of underwater video game levels. So that was cute. I like that.
Right, yeah. You mentioning that also reminds me that's where our Ferris wheel went. It was in the summer event.
God
Yeah.
damn it. Give it back. It was ours.
There wasn't nearly enough accordion all across Fontaine.
Literally.
No mimes.
No mimes, but Farina is definitely a sad clown, and you don't get much more French than that.
Could you imagine a Animo Shielder character who was a mime who just put up invisible walls and like that's how it blocked damage?
Yeah, or
You
like,
know, Lynette should have done that.
Yeah, yeah.
oh my
She
god.
doesn't like to talk anyway.
You're right, that's our mime. We did get our mime. It was just buried beneath the Catgirl magician robot motifs that were a
It was
distraction.
also a Russian asset.
It was also a Russian asset. And speaking of Russian assets, we've got ourselves a fun new playable villain to discuss. And you know that we at the Shade Chamber love our playable villains. How do they set them up? How do they make it plausible for them to be a companion in our traveling team? And this time we are contending with the Big Daddy herself, Spicy Papa Perry, Daddy Dunkachino, Arlecchino of the House of the Hearth.
So earlier I asserted that the Fontaine justice system was the worst justice system I've ever seen. Arlecchino's redemption / retconning was maybe one of the most successful retcons I have ever seen because they not only doubled down, they tripled and quadrupled down in order to get her over.
In our AQ discussion, we talked about the kind of flimsy wallpapering over of the world quest that was perhaps written before they had really set up what they wanted Arlecchino to be like as a character. In that, if you go back to Inazuma, you talk to the NPC involved in a previous quest that asserts that Arlecchino is like an absolute monster. She like puts kids in the death pit. She massacres villages to make more orphans that are basically like her mind-controlled like assassin thralls. And as we said in our Fontaine AQ episode, in that world quest, the very special fortune slip quest line in Inazuma, the Arlecchino they were talking about was, at the time that the quest came out, very clearly the same Butch Cruella de Vil looking Arlecchino from the Fatui reveal trailer. How do we know that? Simple, Watson. Pronouns. Okay, let me back up here. The very special fortune slip questline came out before the Fatui reveal trailer did, and when that quest came out, the Arlecchino in that quest was referred to with male pronouns. Now, Chinese is a language that often doesn't have explicit gendered pronouns, and since the Fatui's designs weren't revealed, the English translators had to infer Arlecchino's gender. Arlecchino being a male Commedia archetype, they guessed Genshin's Arlecchino was a man. The Fatui trailer drops later that year, and Arlecchino is revealed to be a woman. Immediately, the following patch changes Arlecchino's pronouns in that world quest to female. So the timing of that change, coupled with the lack of mention of an Arlecchino succession, makes it pretty clear that the evil orphan factory Arlecchino in that world quest was intended to be our very own Perwer. Crusabina was a later invention. And they did put in a character to tell you, no, that wasn't this Arlecchino, that was the previous Arlecchino. And at first we were just like, haha, clunky retcon. But then they just started throwing out punch after punch of, no, we're serious. No, we're investing in it. No, this is real, though.
Yeah, here's a fight between previous Arlecchino and current Arlecchino to show you just how Shrek'd the version you had all heard about died super hard to the new one who's playable and is much more sympathetic, while still making the new one stern and intimidating.
She is still the scariest character on the playable roster, I think. Okay, I guess technically Arlecchino is the second scariest playable character, and that's only because her true form isn't a very large bird. Even after her story quests, like, they did a really good job, laying on the sympathetic angle and showing that, like, she is in some respects a caring father while still being a fucking terrifying person.
She jumped poor Furina in that alleyway for the lulls.
She loved it.
Like, what is wrong with you?
She loved it, and she had one of her spies follow her back just to make sure she cried herself to sleep.
And then she taunted her about it over tea.
Yeah, while we were there.
Somehow still comes out on top as sympathetic enough to being playable in a game that has historically pulled its punches.
Because she did the bare minimum, and that she will no longer try to kill kids who want to leave the program.
Yeah, they did a really good job threading the needle, because even within her Archon quest, she says, essentially, I disagreed with her methods, but not with her intentions.
She's like, I'm still the foreman of the child soldier factory, big time.
Yeah, so on one hand, there's that. So on the other hand, the game also says, different bitch, plus never happened, plus backstory, plus beat the allegations, plus ratio, plus sympathetic animated backstory. Like, it's just astounding the amount of work they put in to get her over. And we always talk about how this game will be viewed down the road, just because some of these like pitfalls are a process of a dev cycle, but they double down so hard on the retcon that I don't think anyone's ever going to question that this wasn't their intention from the beginning, even though it definitely
Which it wasn't.
Yeah, so like really good save on that. I think she's completely believable as a playable character. It's very clear that like it's on her terms. She is not our friend. This is an alliance of convenience, but she like respects us. I think, saving her children, definitely a big plus in her book. Turn those red X eyes into check marks right there. And she's also, I think, willing to roll with stuff a lot more, perhaps a more successful diplomat than Rosalind was, who has a lot more of a fiery ego. Arlecchino, despite being burnt alive, runs a lot cooler. And you can say like extremely offensive stuff to her face, and all she would say is like, oh, you think that about me? That's actually great. That's really very convenient for me that you think that about me, and I'm gonna let you think that a little longer.
Yeah, they integrated both the retcon and the slander about her into her own character. Like, when you talk to Child about her prior to her character quest, he mentions that she's pretty openly traitorous and is pretty much a sociopath. Whereas when they have a conversation in her AQ, she essentially says, oh yeah, of course the rooster would say that about me. He doesn't like me. But, if you want to go ahead and keep believing that, then, like, by all means, be my guest.
She's like, I literally don't think about you at all. Like, go off.
I like that she does think about some of the other members of the Fatui, just not in a way that we've kind of seen before. Like, she's the first Fatui who has anything good to say about Child. And
no! Yeah, it's true.
In spite of Rosie's passing, she's still fairly sympathetic to Rosie, even by saying, like, yeah, even though she was mean to some of the kids, it's obvious that this was a deeply lonely woman. Like,
Yeah, like she gave her credit for that.
It's like that scene from Super Troopers where Child and Arlecchino are talking with each other, and he's like, "Okay, we don't like each other," and she's just like, "I like you."
Yeah.
And I think, in previous episodes, I've expressed an interest in getting more villainous playable characters or mean playable characters. And I thought they did a good job with Arlecchino, kind of threading that line to where she is likable enough, but still making it clear that, like, yeah, she is not your friend. She is not here to fuck around, and she'll do what she thinks is right, even if the rest of the setting doesn't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
She agrees with you because you spared her children from jail. So she's like, "Yeah, okay."
All right.
Mhm.
I'll do you some solids, I guess. I was actually surprised that she got a boss form this early because I kind of thought it would take a moment later in the story, like where the Traveler earns her wrath, for her to actually fight us. But she, in fact, ended up taking on a cool spider boss persona when she was in maximum father mode during her SQ.
or her maximum spider mode, if you will.
Yes.
But this may or may not be a called shot that ever comes to fruition, but I definitely think this is a case of them lining up allies for Snezhnaya as a region later.
Yeah.
She outright says that she's more, her allegiances lie with the House of the Hearth
Yeah.
and not the Fatui. She's like, yeah, if they collapse, my shit's gonna continue to exist.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I mean, like, the Fatui as a whole, not a really loyal bunch at all. Like, the Tsaritsa really has her hands full with this goofy ass, like, Suicide Squad arrangement of weirdos with their own agendas. And even Arlecchino, who, as the head of the orphanages, is entrenched pretty deeply in the government, is definitely like, she's like, whatever, like,
The orphanage.
the orphanage.
I will say, now that they're getting, like, kind of anime shorts that they're doing for various characters, I do want to see the Tsaritsa do an Amanda Waller style dance from the Suicide Squad isekai ending.
Oh,
If she does, I will make that video.
I mean, you can
I-
probably go and find an MMD of like Bronya Star Rail doing that, and you'd be
Mhm.
like 95% of the way there.
Mhm.
Perfect. Also, somebody realized that outside every Fatui building across Teyvat, there is a cat that has markings similar to the Fatuus that is active in that region's story. So there's a black and white cat outside, I think, Northland Bank in Fontaine. There is a ginger orange boy by the Northland Bank in Liyue. And then at the Goth Hotel, there is kind of a white and smoky gray cat that ostensibly kind of looks like Senora.
yes. Which
So
of course leads
she-
us to the wildly inaccurate theory: was Tomo a member of the Fatui?
Tune in next week as we dive deep into Tomo's Russian connections.
Everyone gotta stop lying right now.
Is he really dead? Is he big band? We'll find out.
Did he die? Is he dead? Is he really big band?
What are you talking about?
I mean, that would be awesome, but what the fuck?
I mean, if he's in the big robot that what's her name?
Oh, that Sandrone has.
Sandrone, yeah.
Oh.
Is he just in the robot that Sandrone
Is he
built?
big band?
Is he big man?
I got so confused and excited about that.
I legitimately forgot that thing's name and Sandrone's name. I just went with what we called them in our episode about them.
I don't think about those two at all, so I forgot that was our stupid nickname for him. So I just really thought you meant big band. I was like, what? Awesome. However, there is one huge downside to Arlecchino being a playable character, and that's that stupid ponytail. It should have just been short back there, kind of like a duck tail. And in fact, her younger self in her flashbacks does have kind of like the duck butt haircut. But, we got to have a flowy thing to look at on the backs of our playable characters. So,
Unless you're Fiorina, who has the benefit of being able to cut her own hair mid-animation. And that's why she got jumped.
oh, that's the origin story. That's where that extension came from.
I feel like they're learning about the rat tails and how little people like them, though, because we're getting skins that get rid of them now, like with
Yeah.
Kaya and Ganyu.
Thank God.
God, I forgot Kaya even had one.
I forgot Kaya existed.
Yeah, I will literally never use the other skins for those characters again. I cannot stand their hair.
Why couldn't it have just been a normal ponytail, Hoyo? Why did you have to give Ganyu a mullet?
It's just so weird.
So how about that Fontaine bingo?
I don't even want to talk about it. We're not doing that again. Well, our Fontaine prediction bingo was an abject, abysmal failure because even though we are Apollo's playthings, when we actually try to own our predictions, they fail miserably. So, from the top row, reading left to right, I'm just going to knock these out as fast as possible. Squares that are a hard yes will be marked in green. Squares that are a kind of are marked in gray. All right, top row. Number 1, we crash a fancy soiree. While Penacony certainly got this in spades, Weak Engine players had to contend with being an uninvited guest at Farina's diplomatic meeting with Arlecchino. Celestia nail Eiffel Tower. No. Celtic ancient civilization. Hard yes. The Lock folk. Umibozu follow-up. No. Bayou subregion. No, not really. There is a swamp that doesn't stay a swamp and it lacks any sort of Cajun flavor that you could possibly assign to it. Second row, and I'm Javert. Hard yes. The Caterpillar quest introduces a very Javert-like prison guard who has very hardline ideals of justice and kind of has a nervous breakdown when things don't fit into his mold. The French Language Académie, or l'Académie Française. No. Roman subregion. Hard yes. Remuria. Japonisme. Hard yes. That's the whole point of Chiori. Her designs are appealing because of the exotic Japanese flair. Lucarcol boss fight. Kind of. Not a boss fight, but we felt that the Meloscenes fit the Lucarcol snail description enough to warrant a kind of. Third row. Masquerade ball. Kind of. We don't go to one, although that's kind of the entire aesthetic of Fontaine. The chapter is called Masquerade of the Guilty, and that refers to all the Fontenoy people being Oceanids in disguise and masquerading as humans. Phoenix Wright reference, hard yes. On top of having very Phoenix Wright-esque gameplay, there were also several web events that literally copied the Phoenix Wright logo type. Free space, Paimon shills a character. Paimon shilled a lot of characters, but seems to have it out for Farina, thus I have it out for Paimon. Poodle styling event. We do not even have poodles for our teapot. What the fuck? I want the one that looks like a little soldier. Panopticon, hard yes. Meropede is laid out like a panopticon. Fourth row, beaucoup de fromage. No, there was absolutely no cheese. Venti shows up. Venti did not show up. Locals hate the Eiffel Tower. There was no Eiffel Tower or similar tourist attraction for locals to hate. Fonch traffic and Fonch cussing. There are not enough people to have traffic in Fontaine. Also, nobody even said merde. Guillotine appears. Hard yes. The rear arch of the Opera Epiclese is very intentionally styled to look like a guillotine. The fifth and final row was a complete failure. Vampire lore? No. Yanfei says objection. Yanfei didn't even show up to the one region it would make sense for her to be in. Le Eurovision Fontenoy. No, we had a film festival, but that wasn't really a showcase of global talent. Baguette event weapon. I fucking wish. World's Fair event / area. No, despite the lead up to Fontaine having to do with inventors and their weird little inventions, there was not an event that really focused on that. Nor was there a giant bandstand shaped like a clamshell, which is a huge loss. Other things the region didn't really touch upon are the reason why the Oceanids left Fontaine, Kave's mom, and how she ran off with a Fonchman, snooty Fonch high society, Fontaine Fashion Week was briefly teased, I want to be there, lore explanations for Numa and Usia energy, a working fleet of ships. How is Beto the only playable character with a fleet of ships? Where is the Fontenoy pirate lady that leads an armada so she can have a ship battle with the Alcor and then duel with Beto and then they kiss? And finally, the thing in the middle of the square. What is it? What is that thing? Someone tell us in the comments. And I don't think we really need to do a report card the way we did for Sumeru, because that's kind of all we have done for Fontaine is criticize it. So in the interest in being fair, there's a lot about Fontaine to just absolutely gush about, and we are going to sing those praises now. Number 1, literally singing. After the end of the AQ, made me want to just kind of quit everything. La Vagalette taught me that humanity is indeed worth protecting, and I have only listened to it about 800 times.
Humanity is worth protecting, and that was a great musical number, and I'm glad they added it to the game, and I'm glad they're continuing to devote resources to that kind of thing in the game.
Music on point. Every part of Fontaine had an excellent music, leading up to the perfect crescendo that was La Vagalette.
Achingly beautiful and in French. In French, like, thank you so much. The fact that they did it in the native language of that region was so based. And something that, like, I really hope they consider going forward. Working with a great French artist, injecting it with, like, French musical motifs, literally making it a number from a musical. Just fantastic. Just utterly fantastic. On a related note, was surprised that Ito's musical number was not only in Japanese, considering how expensive it must be to have TM Revolution on your voice cast, and also to have him sing. However, that was a great little number as well. Not rock and roll, literally just enka, but a perfectly good send up to Bakami Tai that in the English that I listened to it to was knocked out of the park by Max Middleman once again.
Yeah, it was kind of like a joke musical number, but it was still produced. And you know what? That's worth mentioning, especially on the next stop of the Iridescent tour that will either never stop or not start, depending on when you started playing the game.
We've come a long way from Lantern Rite 2023, let's just say. But it
Yeah.
would be amazing to have like, a Japanese singer or a Persian singer like put into the other regions though. Because if they're willing to do that for regions beyond the UA, I think that's really exciting. They pay TM Revolution like constantly to do Ito appearances. And I'm still like, wow, like maybe that's a flex in itself. Like, look how much we can afford to cast TM Revolution. I still can't believe he's there. I love that dude. So from musical climaxes to emotional climaxes, Genshin is extremely good at character writing and just kind of writing emotional journeys. And Fontaine was it at its peak. Every single character was fantastic. Every individual character's emotional journey through the AQ also fantastic. Like, just because the plot wasn't strung together well at all didn't mean that the characters weren't incredibly emotionally investing. Farina is the alpha and omega. Farina's everything. Like, everything from like her being hilariously incompetent to feeling like literally sick to my stomach learning about like all the awful shit she went through to her kind of getting back on her feet in her story quest. Like, wow.
And in spite of like my problems with the entire justice system, Nouvellette was a complete delight. Navia is wife. All of the cast was just a delight to sort of interact with.
Cloran's story quest absolutely blew me away. The D&D premise was so much fun. It had so much attention and care put into the presentation of the story. It had the best story pacing in Genshin because Genshin's narrative tends to really drag its feet and belabor a lot of talking points. We always joke that like Genshin quests have a length quota, but because Cloran's SQ was so dense between the D&D campaign, the Marechaussee lore, Cloran's backstory, and Cloran working through the present with Navia, they were forced to tell it more efficiently, and it was a way more enjoyable experience.
It was nice getting kind of like a part of the Fatui branches that were not exclusively the Harbingers and kind of seeing like the operations of that as well as like just sort of the family unit of the Fatui triplets.
Super believable, like weird little like, bat family vibes.
I really even enjoyed some of the like side characters of the region. Like I thought Charlotte was a great addition. I think we've mentioned before as she kind of helped make the setting feel a little more authentic with like, oh, of course we have news reporters. Like, of course we have people who need to keep track of what's going on in the, courtroom because there's limited seating at the Opera Epiclese. And even Chiori was a delight. I know she's not from Fontaine, but is heavily featured there. And just being able to see like her interact with the fashion scene, which is what France is really known for. There were a lot of good attention to details with these characters that help make them fit into the setting and make the setting feel more authentic for their being there.
The Fontaine events, though few, were awesome. We had such a blast in the Muskets and Roses event, which, by the way, you can find the VOD of the stream that we did with Tales of Teyvat on our YouTube channel. It's, again, kind of a shame that some of Fontaine's best storylines are just not around for newer players to experience, especially the Thelxie event, which basically doubled as Fremonet's story quest. It was heart-wrenching. It did so much for his character, and now it's just gone. If you're a late-coming Fremonet stan, I highly recommend you find a video of that. I don't know much about Risley as a character, but he's very hot.
And we talked a little bit about the Melusines earlier, but they were a great addition to the setting. They were better aliens than any of the quote-unquote aliens that were introduced in Star Rail. To get a creature that can just actually perceive the world differently and has a different way of looking at things and interacting with the world with different senses, that's a lot better than a lot of the aliens present in Star Rail, which is pretty ironic. Feels like they ought to trade a few things between the two games.
Maybe Genshin got the aliens and Honkai Star Rail got everything else.
Yeah, fuck it, just do Melusine World in Star Rail. Just like keep going with them. Finally, we come to the true winner of 4.x, the person responsible for all of this, the ultimate reward we can bestow upon a real-world individual responsible for this. we'd like to give out our shout outs to our boy, Hans Christian Andersen.
All those days of crying face down in the rain really finally paid off.
Face down in a puddle as the basis for The Flood. The Little Mermaid, the true tragedy of Fontaine can all be attributed to this man.
And our boy Hans pulled double duty because not only was he single-handedly responsible for the thematic essence of Fontaine as a region, but he managed to split his time and do some work for Mondstadt as well. Mondstadt 2 is not just a meme, but we are living in the era of Mondstadt 2. Mondstadt got a huge lore bump over the course of patches 4.x. Between Imaginarium, the Hexen Circle, and even the summer event, all focusing on really cementing Mondstadt as the fairy tale region, giving a lot of significance to a lot of texts that have been in the game forever, like the Boar Princess, and folding them back into what we actually see in the game's current day setting. It's all Hans, baby. Hans and his Rohan Kishibe-esque in fiction counterpart character, Anya Andersdottir of the Hexen Circle. Rest in peace, M.
Thank you, Hoyo, for creating the Hans Christian Andersen dick-sucking monument in the summer event.
It's about stories.
It's
Now we
about
just need Port Dornman.
Looking forward to seeing you in the Star Rail FGO crossover event, buddy. That all sounded really spiteful.
It really did.
Yeah.
Wait, okay. I'll do an alternative take. We can see which ones we want. Down to them making a monument for him in the summer event. Looking forward to seeing you in the Honkai FGO crossover event.
See you soon, pal. We asked you guys to send in questions about anything you want to know or anything you want us to cover before we leave Fontaine forever. First one was actually a comment, not a question, referring to our Fontaine design retrospective episode. Made it halfway through, but the constant negativity was draining. And I think we wanted to address that because, listen, I don't think any of this is unfairly negative. We talk about this game because we like it a lot. And when it disappoints us, we're going to say how and why. That's, I think, a lot different than just kind of open bashing on something and not giving an articulate opinion on why. So, sorry you felt that way. There was a lot of stuff we liked about Fontaine as well that we put into this episode. Next question from the viewers / listeners. What are our thoughts on Zenless Zone Zero?
Well, okay, the quick answer right now is it's very good, but it's not at a state where I think it can necessarily sustain itself in its current trajectory, just because I feel a lot more repetition early on. And knowing how they build these things, I'm sure that's going to change, and I'm sure they're going to like introduce new gameplay systems and stylings, and like just the inclusion of new characters is obviously going to change how it's working out. But as far as its initial launch goes, I'm a lot less hooked than I was at the start of Genshin and Star Rail. So I'm going to keep up with it for the time being. But I don't think there's enough to even say on it as far as like, you know, doing like an entire alt episode like we did with Honkai Star Rail. Like if it gets more interesting, I'll talk more about it.
Overall, I really like the aesthetic of it. I think like the street fashion, I would almost call it the graffiti punk aesthetic, looks really cool in what they've set up here. I really like the combat. I think it's fast and engaging. I think just initially though, I'm not really feeling like there's much of a story to invest in. I haven't found any characters who I connect with strong enough to like really keep me interested in what's going on with the setting and the world building and everything that's happening. I just like the overall aesthetic of it. So it'll probably be something that I dip in and out of, but don't commit to fully for what it is. But overall, I am enjoying what I've seen of it so far, and I think other people will too if they're already inclined to play these types of games.
Yeah, Zenless didn't really grab me until I saw it being played. I'm kind of not into the kind of gacha game where every character is a very loud teenage girl. However, I think the aesthetic is awesome. The aughts aesthetic. I like how the gameplay is a little bit more mechanically in depth than Genshin's combat, which is kind of like 2 skills and a dodge. I do also really like the the more like wacky, comical, crazy styling of it. Genshin seems to be like a little more uptight, especially its character animations. I think the wackier, stretchier character animations in Zenless like probably wouldn't work that well in Genshin, but look great in Zenless as being like a wackier game. And if you want to catch up on our thoughts on Zenless Zone Zero and other games that aren't really Genshin or Honkai, come visit us at our server, Shades of Tevat, at bit.ly, Shades of Tevat, no spaces, no capitals. That is kind of where we'll be hanging out and giving our thoughts on miscellaneous things. We run it with our fellow Genshin podcast, Tales of Tevat. Between us, we cover lore discussions, builds, thirst traps, whatever the heck you want. A listener wants to know about our thoughts of the cutscene at the end of the Risley quest.
Haven't seen it.
Oh, wait, I thought you
Haven't
did
played
it.
that. Nope, haven't played that.
I thought you were the only one that did it. I didn't
Nope.
play
Oh
it
no,
either.
Nope.
I
I've
I've
played
seen
it.
story.
but I
I've
don't
seen
rem-
story spoilers.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
I know that gun party happens.
I straight up don't remember it. I played through it, but I don't remember it.
So that's our thoughts. Thanks for writing in. One person sends in a question, the inevitable question, on how Genshin, quote, effed up with 90% of Notlon characters having light skin. Buddy, we don't even want to talk about it. It's dire. It's not great. It's not making us very excited for Notlon. And they clearly know better and are doing otherwise. I'm personally kind of as or more disappointed that they did not hire, to make up for Sumeru. I think they hired a lot more POC that have like, African or South Asian or West Asian, Middle Eastern ancestry. Does not seem to have extended to Notlon, which I think is incredibly disappointing. I would have loved to see more Latino and Pacific Islander and African casting in this nation of gringos. That being said, absolutely fuck you if you harass the actors who were cast. Like, that's not their fault at all. Anything else anyone wants to say about like the most bummer topic in Genshin right now?
No, not really. It's frustrating. That's pretty much it. It's just frustrating.
To get a better sense of our feelings, I would really just refer people back to the conversations we already had on this topic on Sumeru, essentially. Like, they should know better at this point because we've already been through this once.
Yes, so imagine all the thoughts and all the time we took to talk about the cultural representation in Sumeru with Amir, one of our best episodes. You can go check that out. And imagine a world where all of that was said and nothing happened. And that's the world we're living in right now. Great, cool, awesome. Finally, what do you think of the Notlon fashion? Controversial opinion, I like it. I think it works really well. I don't have a problem with them being modern. If you look at like most of the characters in Liyue and Sumeru have like really modern streetwear aesthetics. This is not a game where you're going to get a character with like a grass skirt. Like, that was just never going to happen. They were always going to put a modern spin on it. I hope that the cultural motifs are applied thoughtfully. And also, Chaska sucks. Chaska looks really boring. She could have been like a cool charro or gaucho kind of character. And that's not just because I think women in mariachi suits are hot. It's also because it would be cool.
I'm really liking it so far. I think it has kind of like an athletic wear and streetwear aesthetic to it. Again, similar to like Zenless. I really like Kinnick's design. He's probably going to be the first character I want to roll for, but we'll see how that shakes out. I think Mavuika's design, I mean, obviously, like, Biker Mommy Fire God, great aesthetic.
Jacko Nation, rise up.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. There are a lot of valid criticisms with Mavuika, and colorism notwithstanding, the rest we have all shoved under the rug in favor of Jacko Thirst.
Exactly. I do wish that there was something a little more distinct about it to tie her to the regions that Notlon is nominally inspired by.
How could you say it's not distinct? She's wearing all black. She's a New Zealand's rugby fan. I kind of never like what characters look like when I first see them, and then I got to grow into them, and usually the writing like kind of makes me like them the most.
Fair.
Yeah, that happens to me fairly frequently as well.
Like, everyone
Although
in Sumeru
I
looks busted when you first look at them, and then you're like, oh, okay, you're like a great character in the writing.
I thought Furina almost looked immediately what she should look like. But I actually think that's kind of the exception that proves the rule of, that these designs usually take a moment to grow on you.
Furina's design is literally perfect exactly for what she is. At a glance and in the details, like, she nails it.
which is pretty astonishing because she has 2 designs as well, both of which are good.
Both of which are great. I think outfit-wise, the Notlon cast looks perfectly serviceable and not out of place in a Genshin roster at all. Aside from Hoyo's entrenched colorism problem, I like a lot of the stuff I've seen with Notlon. I think transposing the aspect of war into battle and sport and Pokemon is very clever, especially the ball game arena that Mavuika is standing in at the beginning. That is reminiscent of the Mesoamerican ball game, which has really deep religious implications in Mayan society. And as casual stands of Mesoamerican folklore, we're excited to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, in spite of the flagrant whitewashing, we're going to have some pretty interesting stories to tell you guys coming up.
The part I'm a little bit mixed on is that I would really like some of the, I guess, the cultural way that some of Latin America has engaged with anime to be like a little bit more rap. Like I'm still waiting for a Saint Seiya character, which I think would have been really great.
Latin American anime fandom has a deep and proud history that is dope as shit, and it's just their loss that they're not going to capitalize on any of that. I'm still waiting for Takuria Goku. Fucking stoked to see Polynesian Pacific Islander rep. Was not expecting it in Genshin, but that was kind of my dream for this game. However, Monkey's Paw dictates that the Maori goddess rep is basically white-ass Himiko, which, like, woof, but these are cultural backgrounds that I really adore, and hopefully Genshin doesn't fuck them up. It kind of looks like they might already, but anyway.
As another note, they would be fools if not a single character kicks a projectile at their foes. Like, they gotta have that.
Is that a
that football.
Bionicle reference?
Huh?
Is that
no.
Is that a Bionicle reference? Is that my man Pohatu?
No.
And so, as we bid adieu to Fontaine, let us sail into the sunset that leads us to the land of the burning sun and all burning things. Bon voyage.
We'll see you in Jurassic Park.
Da-na-na-na. I assume that's all we can get away with.
I don't think I ever learned how to swim.
I think I could learn to swim in Jeff Goldblum's presence.
Ain't it the truth?
Godspeed, etc.
Wait, can someone say "get the fuck out" in French?
Dégage d'ici, putain!
Dégage d'ici, putain!
Dégage d'ici, putain!
Yo,